season of the Pacific Division Sheltering Series. Welcome everyone that is from the Pacific Division or our neighboring regions or counties or states or across the nation. Thank you so much for coming on. This session is being recorded and the slides will be sent out afterwards as well. You will get the chance to ask your questions. You can either type in the chat or you can raise your hand and come off mute later on to ask questions. I encourage you to say hi to each other. I know that you're already doing that. That's just so wonderful. The purpose of this session, or that I do this session, because I invite all those subject matter experts to talk about what we learned from Hurricane Ian or past disasters, so we can really help our workforce better. And today's session is a very, very highly demanded topic. And before we start this session, I do want to read something real quick and to remind us that the purpose that we're doing this and the purpose that we joined Red Cross. So I wanted to remind us our mission statement. Our mission statement is the American Red Cross prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. And our vision statement. The American Red Cross, through its strong network of volunteers, donors, and partners, is always there in times of need. We aspire to turn compassion into action so that all people affected by disaster across the country and around the world receive care, shelter, and hope. Our communities are ready and prepared for disasters. Everyone in our country has access to safe, life-saving blood and blood products. All members of our armed services and their families find support and comfort whenever needed. And in an emergency, there are always trained individuals nearby, ready to use their Red Cross skills to save lives. And I wanted to remind everyone our fundamental principles, which is humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary services, unity, universality. So when we're doing this session today, this is one of the heavy topics that we're going to discuss. And I know that we're having, we experienced a lot of similar shelters in recent days. In fact, that Los Angeles County, myself, we do have a shelter going on right now, and it's also 100% precariously housed people that we're supporting. But I want to emphasize the concept of everyone is welcome. That when we become a Red Cross worker, the first thing that we take, the course that we take, is everyone is welcome. And I want to encourage everyone to remember that and to have the compassion, the care, the empathy to show it to our clients. And the session that we're going to talk about today, it is not something that we're sharing saying this is the protocol or this is the doctrine. This is something we're sharing with you to tell you that what worked with us, what didn't work, what did we get out of it, what are we going to implement in the future. And I have a standing thing with my team that whenever you file a complaint or you tell me a complaint or you're telling me a problem, I'm going to ask you what your solutions are. So before you present a problem, before you complain, that I would like to know how we can change it. I mean, the same thing, Hurricane Ian, many of us deployed to Hurricane Ian, that was so difficult. And it was so tough. And I think coming back, the lessons that I learned was that how can we improve it? It was a tough deployment. We lost a lot of folks because they were either too scared to deploy again. It was a traumatic experience for them. That Hurricane Ian was tough. And coming back, now we're doing all those sessions so that we know how to support our clients better and also how to support our workforce better. So again, just remind everyone before we start all this, the most requested topic, this is a very extremely important topic. And I know that it's so difficult. And I'm with you all that just keep an open mind, have the compassion towards us, ourselves, towards others, and also towards our clients. And remember that even if there they're homeless, they're still our clients. Even they're homeless, they're still impacted by our disasters. And we are there to support them. We're volunteers. We're going to use our donors, partners, and volunteers to support our workforce and also our clients. So let me turn this to Jim. Jim is our mass care chief, and I invited him to speak on this because he's the one that actually experienced recently for running a 100% pre-disaster homeless shelter. So Jim, goes to you.
Yeah, thanks, Yiwa. So welcome everybody. And so to start, I was the shelter site manager for a shelter that we ran in San Jose, the Seven Trees Community Center. This is a picture of the team. We're with Mayor Matt Mahan. The mayor's in black pants and black jacket, and I'm the gentleman standing next to him in the black sweatshirt. And one person I did see that is on our call today is Patrick McKenna. Patrick was our shelter supervisor, and Patrick was the shelter site manager when we reopened Seven Trees Community Center in early March for another situation, similar 100% pre-disaster homeless. So welcome, Patrick. Welcome everybody that's on this call. So me, I've been a Red Cross volunteer since 2014, so coming up on 9 years now. Steady state role, I'm the Silicon Valley chapter sheltering coordinator. I've got many gaps: mass care chief, shelter manager, feeding gap, lots of different gaps. My first shelter that I worked in, I know that there's a lot of new folks to Red Cross on this. So my first shelter was 2 day shifts in the neighboring territory. That was in San Francisco. That was in February 2015. And then I first deployed to the Valley Fire in Lake County. I was a shelter service associate to start with, but was given a battlefield promotion to supervisor. That was September 2015. Patrick McKenna, who I just mentioned, was actually my supervisor to start, but he got pulled out of that shelter and got put on a bigger job for that one. That's gotten my battlefield promotion. The last 5 years, I've primarily deployed as a headquarters mass care chief for the headquarters sheltering manager. And in January, I was the shelter site manager at the Seven Trees Community Center. It was my first time actually working in the field in over 5 years. And I want to tell you, I was so happy I chose to not work a bigger job on that statewide DR. It was really refreshing in many ways to actually get into a shelter again and work directly with clients. It had been too long. And so if there are any folks that were in similar situations like me, where you've been working headquarter jobs for a long, long time, look for an opportunity to get back into a shelter and work directly with clients again. It'll rejuvenate you. So how does a Red Cross shelter get to be 100% pre-disaster homeless? I'll give you a timeline of what we experienced here. And as Yiwa mentioned, there are a number of shelters that we've been running and currently do run that are 100% pre-disaster homeless. So this is the experience we had with Seven Trees. So December 31st, it was the second of many atmospheric river events was happening, and more were projected. Our chapter's government liaison began proactively outreaching to our cities and the county. We led that conversation. It was the chapter. We weren't waiting for them to pick up the phone. On January 2nd, San Jose Emergency Operations Center opened up, and our local chapter's RMT activated. And we also reached out to our local volunteers and asked them to start signing up for standby shifts. We wanted to lean into this, so we got prepared for opening shelters. On January 3rd, San Jose issued an evacuation order for local rivers and formally requested the Red Cross to open a shelter on January 4th for a 2-week window with a tentative closing date of January 18th. And as I mentioned, that these are people that were being evacuated because of a disaster. And this is very much in the spirit of everybody is welcome. The person who loses their $2 million house is just as homeless as the person who lost their tent. So we just had the situation where everybody was from the rivers and were pre-disaster homeless. So we opened on the 4th. It was a local response. We staffed it for 5 days as a local response. It was also January 4th is when the 3rd atmospheric river event happened, and multiple city EOCs started to open. As I mentioned, 5 days we ran it as a local response. The DRO took over on January 9th. We also opened a second shelter in San Jose at the Camden Community Center. But this is also when we requested a meeting with the city to discuss a mobilization plan on January 9th. Still relatively early in this whole response. On the 24th is when Seven Trees closed, and Camden closed the next day. So Seven Trees was open almost 3 weeks, a little bit past the original date that we had projected. So, the key thing is this was not a homeless shelter. Rather, it's a Red Cross shelter with just the clientele was 100% pre-disaster homeless. The key takeaways I want you to have from this in terms of what do we do, next time is talking about the demobilization plan early. When we had that initial conversation with the city of San Jose, on January 3rd about opening the shelter, we actually talked about the closing, and we energized that conversation on January 9th and really wanted to get in place that demobilization plan. And for those of you who have worked in shelters before, you know that the people who come from marginalized housing, the pre-disaster homeless, those are sometimes some of the hardest people to place into a better housing situation. So you really got to lean into those conversations early on when you have 100% pre-disaster homeless. So things that are really important, lessons learned, staff health and well-being. We say that, our staff, their safety is our #1 priority. Their well-being is our #1 priority. So, 100% pre-disaster homeless shelter, it can be very complex and stressful. And so the standard staffing model is the baseline, but think about adding an extra shelter worker or 2 per shift. You can't have enough people on, especially when you're ramping up. And the usual staff wellness standards apply, but you really need to adhere to these things. Days off, you got to schedule them early and take them. And the manager and the supervisors, they need to lead by example. And shift changes, make sure that they're quick. The shift meetings, we try to make them 10 minutes or less. Get the departing team on the road. Let them go and relax and get some downtime. These tend to be things that get to be a little lax on some sheltering operations, and especially the days off and getting those things scheduled. So make sure that you are taking care of yourself, taking care of your teams, for making sure that days off are getting scheduled, and the shift changes are quick. Schedule 8-hour shifts if possible, especially in local response mode. When a national DR takes over, it's usually 12-hour shifts. But if you're in a local response mode, try to work 8-hour shifts. We augmented our local team with trained members from our local CERT organization, the Community Emergency Response Team. We had actually given them sheltering training in the past. So we augmented our team. We were able to work 8-hour shifts while we're in that 5-day window of local response. The added benefit is it actually makes it more flexible for people who can't deploy nationally because they've got work commitments and family commitments. So making an 8-hour shift makes it more accessible for new volunteers to actually work in a shelter. Advocate for on-site DMH. They're there for clients and for volunteers. So it's a very stressful situation. So having DMH there can be a benefit for the volunteers, not just for the clients. Find a staff break room away from the thrum. This is something we didn't identify the first day that we opened the shelter, but we found a room that was away from the hub and all the activity where volunteers could go and take a break if they needed it. And let your staff know, if you're the shelter supervisor, the shelter manager, let them know it's okay to request a transfer to something different if that shelter environment is too much. This is really important. We had somebody who, this was after it became a national deployment. They were there on site at Seven Trees for a couple of days, and it wasn't the right environment for them. They didn't talk to anybody about it, and they tapped out, and they went home. They did not talk to anybody. They didn't see if there was something else they could do that fit more what they could handle. So it's really important. And for this slide of all these things I just went through, this is the key thing, I think, for everybody to know in a pre-disaster homeless shelter, that it's okay to request a transfer to something different if this environment is just too much. Don't tap out. Don't let your staff tap out if you're a supervisor. Get them into something that fits what is more suitable for them. Security is another thing about, safety of our staff is number one, staff and clients. So be proactive versus reactive, and assume that on-site security is needed 24/7 until proven otherwise. This is something I asked for on day one at Seven Trees. It took way too long for on-site security to get there. And so especially with the kinds of clientele that we had, it was just a matter of time before we had issues. And so on day 6, the day that it turned over to a national DR, we actually had 5 police interventions, 4 of which included police monitored evictions. And it's just a matter of time. And so ask for that security right up front. And make sure that request is in before any sizable shelter population has arrived. And don't settle for what's given. And maybe this is a message more for the supervisors and the manager. If you're hearing that I got nothing yet, make sure it's a key topic for the E3 meeting at headquarters. I really like the new daily shelter report, because it's not about numbers, it's about the needs of the shelter, and sheltering is our #1 priority. And so the E3 meeting is where the sheltering manager, headquarters sheltering manager can bring key issues up. And so if we're getting nothing yet as the response on the request, then make sure it's discussed at the E3 meeting. Mall cops, they're generally not sufficient. They're little or no deterrent, limited intervention, low engagement. On day 6, the morning of day 6, we actually had a couple of what I call mall cops that came. I couldn't tell them from the clients, especially one of them I couldn't tell from our clients. So not a real deterrent factor. But armed and badged may be too much. So non-police and sheriff professionals may be just right. So we eventually received City Hall security guards on site 24 hours. So this was on day 7. Day 6 was that day where we had all the police interventions. We had on-site security guards from the City Hall there on day 7, and they were there every day afterwards. And Patrick, when we opened up the Seven Trees again in March, those same City Hall security guards were there on site from day 1. So it's just the right amount. So security is the other key thing. Be proactive about asking for it, and look for something that's above what I call a mall cop, but armed and badged maybe too much. Look for something that's kind of in the middle there, something like a non-police or sheriff professional like we had with the City Hall security guards.
Jim, we have a question before you proceed.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat about, you mentioned that we deploy CERT. So how do we request for CERT and who deploys them?
How do we request for cert? So hopefully between your local government, your external relations GovOps, and your sheltering coordinator, you're developing relationships with your local CERT organizations during steady state times, and you're arranging for sheltering training for those CERT members. And so what we did with Seven Trees is on January 3rd, that's when I reached out to the CERT coordinator and asked if the people that we had trained, they needed to go through the registration process. We gave them the information of how to become a registered Red Cross volunteer. They needed to go through the background check with Red Cross. And then we created shifts in a shift tool for them to sign up for. So it's not that difficult, but the important thing is during steady state is to get that relationships built and to get them trained, because then it's just almost like you would do with an event-based volunteer in creating shifts in a shift tool and granting them access to sign up for those shifts. And some of them were great and they've become regular Red Cross volunteers as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Jim. And I think, you brought up a very, very good point that we're really not alone. Sheltering is the primary function or it's the focus, but without all the external partners and relations that we're going to work with, we really need their thing. And the other thing I want to point out is I like that you said, nothing yet, don't settle for what is given. And I just want to remind everyone that also when you request for additional resources, you might want to think ahead of time as in how long it takes to have the resources ready. Like what Jim said very, very early on is the second you're opening shelter, you need to think about your closing plan. And again, it's not that we do not want our folks, it's not that we don't want to help our clients. It's that we have to plan forward. We have to plan ahead. We need to know it really takes an army to find out to support our clients. And also to take into consideration of, what is the roadblock? That's one thing that I really like to ask for our meetings. When I run with my team, I said, what is the roadblock? And for our LA region, when we open our shelter on Sunday and it's still ongoing right now. And the roadblock for getting security or getting anything that we wanted was because on Sunday we had LA Marathon going. So all the police, they were there. So we couldn't get the security. Tuesday, now is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We have LAUSD, which is the second largest school district in the nation. They're on strike. So that took away all those. So I encourage you that don't settle for what is given and also ask for, hey, what is the roadblock? How can we make it better? What can we do in the meantime? Whether it's as a supervisor, as a service associate, what resources do we have? What can we do in the meantime so we can make the client's life easier and also make our lives easier? Okay, thank you, Jim. Let's continue.
Yep. I see in the chat here, I think Kenneth is asking about unincorporated areas of the county. If once these CERT volunteers go through the background check and they're able to work any job that's in the shift tool within a 60-mile radius, just like an EBV would be able to. So that would include the unincorporated areas of the county. All right. So the pre-disaster homeless may have higher rates of physical health and mental health issues. Shelter volunteers are not equipped to handle. We have, our training class on disaster mental health, or but it's not sufficient. The headquarters sheltering managers should strongly advocate for on-site DMH and DHS for 24/7 coverage until proven otherwise, and make it the E3 meeting issue as well if you're not getting traction against it. That's, once again, it's probably the headquarters sheltering manager should be the advocate for that. It's been my experience and this is my experience. Red Cross, DMH may resist being on site 24/7, and it's oftentimes thought of and treated as a daytime only group. But if you've worked in a shelter before that has high pre-disaster homeless, sometimes the night brings out the worst in people. And so having them on site 24/7 is really important. And that's where, phoning a DMHer at night, it may not be an effective model. First, our night shelter staff is typically small. And if you have some DMH issue, it usually takes more than one person to be involved with it. And so when you have a small shelter staff to begin with, you really get spread thin really fast. And these issues often require direct personal contact, not a phone. And once again, a great example of partnerships to make sheltering work well is county behavioral health. And that's what we had at our shelter. We had county behavioral health there during the day. Red Cross DMH was there at night. It wound up being a really, really good model. So make sure you got that 24/7 coverage. That's the key takeaway on this. For these shelters at 100% pre-disaster homeless, have on-site DMH coverage until it's proven otherwise necessary. Actually, I should pause there, make sure we don't have any important questions on this. All right, I don't see anything.
There's none in the chat, correct?
Great. All right, atmospheric rivers, a lot of rain, a lot of wet people coming in, so getting clean, dry clothes. So at that point, we weren't receiving any UDM, unsolicited donations for the first week. It was constantly raining. And so but clients were always arriving at the shelter in wet clothes with no or minimal replacements. And so our community partner engagement team worked with Goodwill to get a large donation of clean, dry clothes, which were brought to the shelter. And we used a personal shopper experience in meeting with clients to get their basic clothing needs met. And we tried to get them 2 changes of clothes, one to wear and one to wash. A lot of people showed up with literally nothing. And so this was what we tried to do, is get them 2 changes of clothes. So we had somebody that was dedicated to this initially, and then it became part of the shelter staff. Just whoever was around the shelter SA would interview a client in the lobby for what their needs were and what sizes. And that's to try to get that 2 sets of clothes goal. The personal shopper would go to the clothes room to fulfill the order. We kept that under lock and key, and we'd bring a bag to the client. We wouldn't brine that bag, so sorry about the misspell, but we'd bring a bag to the client that was out in the lobby still. The client would not go to the clothing room. And we do some limited exchanges, but we weren't trying to, do too much of that. We're just trying to get basic needs met. So this was something that worked out really well. It really helped us to control how much stuff was around people's cots, using that personal shopper experience to really meet their basic clothing needs. One to wear and one to wash.
And Jim, we have a question that, we oftentimes we don't think about laundry facilities and whatnot when we open a shelter. So we have a question as where do they wash where do they do their laundries?
Yeah, just hold that thought, because at least through our experience, we'll touch on that next here. Yeah, you need to have some way to keep those clothes clean. So the cleanliness of the shelter environment was another thing that had challenges with this population. So one thing that we did is we had kind of a policy on allowing clients only to bring 2 bags of personal belongings into the shelter, I should say more to the dormitory, to limit the stuff creep and to allow for efficient use of the limited dorm space. And we did get to maximum capacity in our dormitory space. We were scrambling to find just that one more space, just that's how tight we were. So the homeless advocacy groups that were bringing clients to the shelter, they kind of knew in advance of this 2-bag limit. and they help clients figure out which belongings to bring to the shelter. So doing that kind of communication with those homeless advocacy groups is an important thing to make sure that you don't have clients that show up with everything that they own. And so we wound up having minimal on-site storage dedicated for storing client belongings, that excess belongings that exceeded the limit. And this was really key for us. We had an operational on-site shower trailer and clothes washing trailer within 24 hours of the shelter opening. And in all the shelters that I've ever run, this has never, ever happened. And when we opened up 7 Trees again in March, within 24 hours, same thing, shelter trailer on site and a clothes washing trailer within 24 hours of the opening. It was fantastic. And maybe this is, maybe we're a little bit blessed working with the city of San Jose. If you go back to the flood of 2017 with the city of San Jose, it was poorly prepared. And they really have upped their preparations for disaster response. And so this is just part of their response model now, is to have these on site. So the earlier you can get these on site, the better you can serve your clients, especially if you're trying to control how much clothes and belongings they have around their cot space. So there's enough capacity in these. I think our washer and dryer units had 12 washers and 12 dryers in them. The shower trailers had 4 women's stalls and 4 men's stalls. So we had hours, posted hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., after which time they were locked up. Another thing that we did, and I'll have to hats off to our nighttime supervisor, Paula, she's the one who really kind of started enforcing this, is doing simple things like limiting 1 water bottle per cot in a dormitory. We found, there were some clients who just scattered all their stuff around and trying to keep things really neat. And so our dormitory team was constantly kind of reinforcing that, limiting the water bottles that we were allowing clients to have around their cots. So key takeaways on this is, having a policy on allowing clients to bring in 2 bags of personal belongings into the shelter to limit that. And I know that there's, our storage agreement that we have. You really want to handle this stuff as little as you possibly can. So we tried to not have this stuff brought to the shelter. Communicate to your homeless advocacy groups to try to limit how much stuff is brought in. And then try to get those on-site shower trailers and clothes washing trailers on site as quickly as you possibly can.
And Jim, we have 2 questions. Number one, I think you partially addressed it already, that where would those clients store their shopping carts or other stuff?
Yeah, we had no shopping carts. Most of the people that were at our shelter were brought in to us. They were driven in from the homeless advocacy groups. And once again, there was some communication with them about limiting the amount of stuff that people were brought in. Most people were leaving the extra stuff back at their encampment spaces. They brought in their stuff that they were really concerned about getting stolen, but not, there weren't any real issues that were brought up with the clients about the limits that we were trying to impose. And if people brought in extra stuff, then we bagged and tagged it and stored it for them. We let them go through what stuff they wanted to have around their cots, but the extra stuff we put into a side room.
And can you tell us again, that was the trailer supplied by city or county, or was just a private partner that supplied the trailer, the shower trailer?
The city provided both trailers. Yeah. Now, like I said, it was a big surprise to me when I drove up and they were already working on the hookups. So I was like, fantastic. I'm not going to say no to that.
We also have a shower trailer for our current thing going on right now, and it's also supplied by the city as well. Okay, let's continue, that we have 30 minutes remaining.
Okay. So no notice departures. One thing that this set of clientele was demonstrating was the higher rate of what looked like they were leaving, but we weren't really sure. So a lot of cots that were looking undisturbed for 24 hours, And we were at capacity. We're always looking for that extra spot. And there are a lot of cots that look like, I don't think that person's there anymore. But so we implemented a cot abandonment notice and tracking log. It's not something that I've seen ever with the Red Cross. And I'll show you the what we had cooked up here in just a bit. But so cots that we thought were abandoned, we tip them on their sides and we put the notice, we tape it to the cot. We'd update the log with every posted notice. And clients that were returning were directed by the notice to bring the notice to the registration desk. And after abandonment, notice expiration, the client's remaining belongings were bagged and tagged, the cot was cleaned, and the space was made available for a new client. So the key takeaway from this is, implement a cot abandonment notice and tracking log. It'll help you kind of maintain, a sense of who's actually in the shelter and who's not. So of all the cot abandonment notices that we posted, I want to say we only had 2 clients that came back, and we had their stuff and we were able to reconnect them to their stuff. But so the notice is pretty simple. We did it in English and Spanish. Our clientele we've maxed population, I think, at 116 one night. And so there were English speakers or Spanish speakers. We had one Vietnamese speaker who came in later on. So we put the date and the time of the notice at the top. And then we put the date and the time that the notice expires down below, and the verbiage in between talks about that the cot may be given to somebody else if they don't return back by the time below. And then we also put down the cot number on the notice. So that way, if they actually bring that notice to the registration desk, we know which cot it belongs to. The tracking log is pretty simple. The first 4 columns just capture the information that are on the notice. What's the cot number, the client name, if you know it, the date and the time the notice is posted, and then the date and time the deadline that was given to the client. The next 2 columns are then for what happens after that expiration notice expires, or if the client actually does come back and brings the registration, the notice to the registration desk. So that helped us really keep control of what was going on in the, who's there and who's not there. All right. So our key points, just to summarize what I've gone through here: external relations should begin discussions on closing strategy early. Staff well-being is number 1. So it's okay to ask for something else. This is not the best environment for everybody. Just acknowledge it up front, and it's okay to ask for something else. Security, shelter manager requests should request it on site, 24/7, professional, and get it in early. The HQ shelter manager should advocate for 24/7 DMH and DHS. DHS is usually there 24/7 without much of a struggle. DMH can be one that you have to advocate for and lobby for hard. Implement the personal shopper process to satisfy the client's basic clothing needs. That works if you get, the shower trailer or the washer dryer trailer on site, or some way for clients to clean their clothes. Limit the clients to 2 bags of belongings in the dormitory. And get sufficient showers and clothes washing capacity early. I say capacity. Ideally, they're on site to make it easy. It may be some other solution, but that's to be figured out. Every shelter is different. We were blessed with having these units that were on site. The important thing is we had the capacity early. And then implement a cot abandonment notice and tracker. So those were the summary of my key points. So let me I'll just say thank you for coming, and those are the key lessons that I have from the from our shelter. By the way, we did have pets in our shelter. We had a co-located pet shelter set up. We had a room dedicated for dogs. So we had a room for cats. You don't want to mix the two if you can avoid it. And so we had separate rooms for dogs and cats. I think we had a max dog population of 7 and a max cat population of 2. There were some clients who came to the shelter and they were told that they have their space in the main dormitory and a space for their pet, which they could get to 24 hours a day. We didn't have that locked. We did have it monitored, but some clients chose not to take advantage of that opportunity for them and their pet to have sheltering. We did not allow for cohabitation pet sheltering. So,
Jim.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. So we do have some questions. One, what do you do with the items that they were not claimed? They abandoned the cot and it was never claimed. What do you do with them?
Yeah, so once we eventually closed the shelter, I think those were all just disposed of. Yeah, there's nothing we could do.
Gotcha. And we had a question that, did we have any outdoor populations during that time?
No, I mean, we had successive wave after wave after wave of heavy rain, and so we had no outdoor population at all.
And I do see a question that, did you get any supplies, as in printers or anything from the technology department? Did you get anything?
Absolutely. Those of you who have worked with me on DRs before know that one of the first things I request for when we have a national DR is to get a shelter phone and a shelter printer and a shelter computer. So we got those quite early.
And how early did you get? Is it the same day, the next day, or what is the turnaround time that you got?
So once it became a national DR, I think we got it on about, I want to say day 5 of it being open. So it's day 5. The national DR had started at that point. I may be off a day, but maybe it was day 6.
And can you explain to us that, I mean, maybe some of us are thinking, oh my God, I requested for long. What does it take so long? Why is it taking so long? Can you just explain to us a little better so then we can have expectation that realistically we cannot get it the second that we request? If you request, if you make the request today, you're not going to get the computer the next hour. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I'll talk more from experience. The chapters oftentimes may have a stash of phones, right? So when I'm standing up, remember for the first 5 days it was a local response, and so when I'm thinking about local response, I'm not thinking about long term. I'm not thinking about a shelter computer and a printer and a shelter phone, but when it became clear that this was going to be a bit of a longer term, and we did have a DR with a disaster services technology or a DST team to actually put a request into. We put the request in to get the phone and computer. I believe that the phones and computers on DRs they are warehoused in hubs. And so it takes a bit of time for that material to make its way onto a plane or a truck to get shipped to your disaster site. And then the DST team needs time to log it and inventory it and to do what they need to do before they can actually get out in the field. And then face it, on day 5 of what was happening in the state of California in early January, it was a statewide DR. I think there were disaster operations in some 20 different counties of the state. And so you've also got that of, where's the biggest priority? We were, I think, identified as a priority site because at that time, in the first week, we had the largest single shelter population of any shelter open in the state at that time. So maybe that was a thing that helped us in terms of being put high on the priority list. But there are a number of factors that slow things down. I think the first and foremost is that hub process that they use for storing the equipment, and it takes time to get it shipped to the disaster site, and then some time to triage it, and then to get it out in the field.
So the learning lesson that I'm hearing is that if you know you're going to need all those printers and cell phones and laptops, number one is you need to request early, and also that you need to take into consideration of the travel times. And same thing that when you request the material resources or human resources, that it takes time for people to travel. So next question we have is that, so when we close the shelter, when we have folks transition out of the shelter, where did they go and what support did Red Cross provide? Did we provide any shelter resident transition team or on-site, or did we open cases for them? What did we do?
Yeah, we had a shelter resident transition team there that was part of the transition process. The city of San Jose created a city-supported encampment. Or actually, I think there were a couple of different ones, given the size of the populations at both Seven Trees and Camden. They had a couple of different sites, but they were city-supported encampments. And so they provided sleeping bags and tents, and we did what we could. I think we provided comfort kits. The city provided pretty much everything that on site at these new places in terms of whatever they were doing at their other homeless shelter sites in terms of not case management, but health services and mental health services. So once they got to these sites, then they were managed by the city. But it was better than it's not a roof over their head, but it was a better living situation than where they came from. Remember, they were living in the creeks and rivers of San Jose, and they were moved to a city-supported encampment location.
Thank you. That's wonderful. It sounds like that, when we closed the shelter, that all the clients, they really had a safe place to go, that we didn't abandon them in any way, or that we did not force a closure simply just because, we want to plan for the closure or that have a demobilization plan, but we really took good care of our clients. And the next question we have is, did you have to purchase any supplies using your purchasing card, your P card or mission card, or MCPC mass care procurement card? And also that, how was the feeding done, given the population and given that you have such a diverse population?
Yeah. So yes, I've got a P card. Given my role as our territory's sheltering coordinator, I have a P card. So we did a lot of purchases early on with the P card. This is before logistics really got spun up. So we were kind of really self-sufficient. Our feeding lead was Marcy Taylor. She's local as well with our chapter. And so she was doing all the feeding coordination. And she has I think she has a P card as well. So we were doing a lot of charges against our P card. They eventually all got charged. Those charges got the accounting code to the DR against them. And so, yeah, I mean, do what you need to do to keep things stocked. One thing I should have put on maybe the lessons learned is, and the story is, I think we were on like day 3 or something like that, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and we were out of snacks, and we're getting low on snacks. So I made a run to the Lucky store right before it closed, and I bought $60 of snacks, and I brought them back. And the next morning, the staff tells me, hey, we need more snacks. And I was like, what do you mean we need more snacks? We had $60 worth. And so, what we wound up implementing was at night when the the feeding room, we had it open, 24 hours a day for people to go in and sit, but we brought all the snacks to the registration table because we didn't have that big of a team at night. And so we put everything behind the table. And so clients had to come to the table to request, a couple of snacks, and we'd give them out. And so we really limited the, I don't know, the hoarding that may have been going on by laying them out on the table a little bit unwatched. So that helped in terms of controlling how much was going against the P card once we made that flip. And feeding went well, by the way. I see Heinrich asked the second question about feeding. It was local supported at first, but then we used Martha's Kitchen as our feeding partner once it turned over the DR. And so they were bringing 2 meals a day on site and delivering breakfast, usually in bulk. Sometimes this was over the Martin Luther King weekend also, and so we got a pallet of pastry one day that was supposed to get us through the weekend. By the way, a lesson learned is if you get a pallet of pastry, check the expiration dates on it, because half the stuff was, after we unpacked it, wound up being bad, and we had to throw it out. But we had a partner that provided our food at that shelter.
Great. And, as you can see that this is a very, very popular topic and a highly demanded topic. So we're getting a lot of questions. But before we go to the next question, I do want to let everyone know that for the next session, we're going to dedicate one single session to have you to ask how to handle difficult situations. So I'm going to, again, to invite all the subject matter expert to answer the question about all the questions that you have here. And I think one of this homeless population, pre-disaster homeless population, is, the bigger topic. That's why we dedicate a whole session. But I encourage you, if you can email me, text me, or put in the chat, if there's any other questions that you want us to address to, in the next session, so that we can go over about the difficult situations. And let's go to Patrick, then we'll go to the chat. Patrick, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, this is Patrick. I was one of the shelter managers at the site, and I just wanted to overemphasize the need for the mental health people who were local, that were for behavioral health, because a lot of our clients, I wouldn't say a lot, but we had a large schizophrenic crowd in this. And you've seen homeless people before with schizophrenia, where you put 120 of these people in a single room, the percentage goes up and they become very loud. And so you need to set up parameters for your how you're going to evict somebody, because the noise level, the yelling and the screaming of what's going on, sometimes that is not necessarily a reason to evict somebody. It took us a few days to work out with our government partners their criteria by which we would evict somebody, and our tolerance level for behavior has to be raised because of the nature of this crowd. And I just wanted to know, Jim, when do you put the criteria? It took us like day 4 before we just started doing evictions. And from that point forward, we just had a line that we drew, and we went across it. But trying to get that line established earlier would be great. And having people on board who knows what's going on is also great. Sort of a question.
Yeah, I think, when safety of volunteers and the other clients is kind of your guiding principle, right? And so when behavioral issues start to encroach upon that, one of our day 6 evictions was, somebody that I really like, but this person was a risk to others around him because of his behavior. And so that's led to that eviction. But we had also a client that had uncontrollable shouting. So in just at any given moment, he would just start shouting. And so there were other clients that were starting to get really agitated and were threatening violence against that gentleman. And so we moved him out of the dormitory out into the hallway where he could be monitored. And that seemed to calm things down. So try to find workarounds there was maybe that the shouter where there was the threat of violence, but try to find a way to work with that client to make sure that they can stay in the shelter. But once again, when it becomes a real threat to the volunteers and to the clients, that threatening client has to go. I see Seth has a question about what's the Red Cross policy on clients under the influence. Well, we did have a number of clients that were under the influence. We knew we had a lot of drug users. We're not just talking about, people with alcohol or smoking marijuana. There were a lot of heavy drug users with this clientele. And so the Red Cross policy is, no drugs, no alcohol in the shelter. And as long as a client wasn't a threat to people around him, if they were high or hungover, that's fine. They sleep it off. There were more than one person. We had to bring a throw-up bag to have it next to their cot because we knew they were coming down from something. It's if you find people with drugs or alcohol, well, that's an evictable offense. But just being under the influence is not. So if they become threatening because of their influence or being under the influence, then that's a different issue. Once again, client and volunteer safety is number one, and so they cannot become belligerent and threatening.
And we have a question that what was the highest population that you had for the shelter?
Yeah, I want to say we were at 116 was the official count. I think that night we actually, after the official count went in, we squeezed in another 4 people, something like that. So I think we topped out at 120.
And how many staff did you have for the 120 population?
Boy, I think during the day, we had, of shelter workers, we had usually about 6, and we had 2 county mental health during the day and at least one mental health at night. And we had 2 to 3 health services people on staff as well.
So we use more than usual.
They also had a couple of their staff that were on site. We had at least 2 security guards that were on staff from day 7 on. So we had a pretty good footprint of people on site.
That's wonderful. And Deborah is asking, was there any need for Narcan?
We never had to use it, but we had it. And in fact, when we opened up the 7, our chapter got this boatload of Narcan from the first disaster in January. So when we opened up the shelter in March, we had the shelter workers go through the quick training on how to use Narcan, and the shelter workers actually carried Narcan with them. But we did not have to use it. We were ready. So.
And I have one final question, and I usually like to, conclude that way, is that if the attendees, like we said very, very early on, that we have a lot of newer folks on here, that if this is their first shelter experience, they're so scared, they're so nervous, and they feel uncomfortable. And hearing this, what is one piece of advice would you give to the newer folks, or even experience? I mean, for myself, I learned a lot through this one. I even told my team that, I said, next time when we have this, I'm going to, encourage people to read this. So what is one piece of advice that you would give to a workforce if this is their first experience,
Yeah, don't internalize your anxiety. You got to open up about it. Let your supervisor know your anxiety. If you have a DMH person that's on site, talk to them. If you don't have somebody that's on site, there should be a 24-hour DMH line that you can call. And back to that, that slide that in fact, it's right here, but my second bullet. It's okay to ask for something else also. Give it a shot. I mean, talk to people. don't just internalize that anxiety and let it fester. Talk about it. Just the talking about it may make you feel better. And what you're going to find out is, as you talk about it, you're going to know that you're supported. Your supervisor should be supporting you. Your DHS or DMH person is going to be supporting you. You're going to find this kind of this support network that maybe you didn't feel before. So talk about it. Don't internalize it.
Thank you. And I love that. And I see John Holly is on the call with us. And John Holly is my region's, LA region's sheltering program lead, and he's also on this operation with us. And I'd like to use his word to conclude as well, is that don't be the bottleneck of yourself. Ask for help, request for help, and also be willing to open up. And the whole reason that we're doing all the series now, and especially for bringing this topic using this 1 hour session, is not to try to scare our workforce. It's not to say that, hey, quit, don't do it. It's really that our goal is to help all of us to prepare better so we can have our expectations. So we don't feel so scared going in there. There's always the first time. And it is okay to be scared. It is okay that you're feeling a little uncomfortable. And that's what we're all here for. That's what disaster mental health is here for. That's what disaster health services are there for. And that's also what your supervisor is here for. There's at one single given time, there's no point or there's no sense of that I have to say yes and I have to be okay and I cannot turn down anything, or that I have to prove to my supervisor that I can do what is assigned to me. It is always okay to ask for help, to ask for support. And after all, we're only human. I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for your compassion, your attitude towards this. I know this is a very, very heavy topic. I know that we really want to help our clients, but sometimes we can't. It is okay to say no. And I really appreciate you taking the time to present, Jim. Thank you so much for coming on. I will see you all next week. Have a great evening.
Thank you.